The Mediterranean wind carried the scent of gunpowder and salt as Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon squinted against the harsh North African sun. Before him lay the fortified city of Derna, its white walls gleaming like polished bone against the azure sky. This April morning in 1805 would forever alter the course of America's military legacy. The young republic, barely 2 decades old, was about to make its first decisive mark on foreign soil. "Those walls have never faced American resolve," O'Bannon muttered to himself, tightening his grip on his sword hilt as he surveyed the Ottoman defenses. Behind him stood a most unusual force. 8 United States Marines, a former consul general with diplomatic savvy but military inexperience, and a mercenary army of several hundred Arab and Greek soldiers, many of whom had never fought together. Before this campaign, the journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. For years, the Barbary states of North Africa had terrorized American merchant vessels, seizing ships, stealing cargo, and enslaving sailors. President Thomas Jefferson, refusing to continue paying the escalating tribute demands, had dispatched naval forces to the Mediterranean in 1801. After 4 years of inconclusive naval blockades and battles, the Americans sought a bold new strategy. "We can no longer tolerate these pirates demanding tribute from our nation," Jefferson had declared in a cabinet meeting back in Washington. "We must strike at the heart of their power." This context is drawn from the naval history and heritage. Command archives documenting America's first overseas military engagement. The ambitious plan centered on William Eaton, former U.S. consul to Tunis, who proposed installing Hamid Karamanli, the exiled rightful ruler of Tripoli, in place of his usurper brother Yusuf. To accomplish this audacious scheme, Eaton and his small contingent of Marines had journeyed to Alexandria, Egypt, recruited a mercenary force, and then marched 500 miles across the Libyan desert, an epic journey fraught with thirst, hunger, mutinies, and the constant threat of attack. Lieutenant O'Bannon, commanding the Marine detachment, had proven indispensable during this harrowing march. When Arab mercenaries threatened to abandon the expedition, it was O'Bannon's disciplined Marines who held the fragile alliance together. When supplies ran perilously low in the desert, it was O'Bannon's calm resolve that prevented total collapse. Now, standing before the walled city of Derna, the first target in their campaign to overthrow Yusuf, O'Bannon understood that failure here would doom not only their expedition, but potentially signal American weakness in its first significant overseas military venture. "The men are ready, sir," reported Sergeant Williams, his face weathered from the desert crossing. "Though I must say, some of our Arab allies seem hesitant." O'Bannon nodded grimly. "They've witnessed the cannons on those walls. But remind them of Governor Eaton's promise of payment and Hamid's guarantees of position once his brother is overthrown." Nearby, William Eaton conferred with Hamid Karamanli, the exiled ruler whose claim to the throne provided the political justification for this unlikely campaign. Though Hamid possessed royal lineage, some among the expedition privately questioned his courage and leadership. As dusk settled over the encampment, O'Bannon gathered his Marines. "Tomorrow, we fight not just for America, but for history," he told them quietly. "Few will believe what we've accomplished just to reach this point, crossing a desert few Europeans have survived, with a force cobbled together from 3 continents and a half-dozen languages." The Marines checked their weapons one final time, by firelight. Unlike the mercenaries who chattered nervously throughout the camp, these men maintained a professional silence. They understood what the morning would bring, and each man contemplated the looming battle in his own way. In the command tent, Eaton finalized the assault plan. The small American naval squadron offshore would provide bombardment support while the ground forces would split into 3 groups for the assault. The Marines, despite their small number, would lead the most critical thrust directly toward the harbor fortress. Dawn would bring America's first land battle on foreign shores, a test of the young nation's resolve and a harbinger of its future role on the world stage. 3 weeks earlier, the prospects of reaching Derna had seemed remote at best. The 500-mile march across the Libyan desert had tested the expedition beyond all reasonable limits of human endurance. What began as an ambitious force of approximately 400 men, including Arab cavalry, Greek infantry, The small marine contingent and various servants and camp followers had been reduced by hardship and desertion with each passing day. "Water, again," mumbled Private Anthony Blake, his parched lips cracking as he rationed his precious mouthful. "Never thought I'd miss the Atlantic spray so much." The Marines' woolen uniforms, designed for the temperate climate of the American eastern seaboard, proved torturous under the Libyan sun, yet they maintained discipline, while their mercenary allies frequently threatened mutiny over the harsh conditions. On the 28th day of their march, tensions finally boiled over. A significant contingent of Arab cavalry surrounded William Eaton's tent, demanding additional payment and threatening to abandon the expedition, or worse, to deliver the Americans to Yusuf's forces for a handsome reward. "They will kill us all by nightfall," warned Hamid, visibly shaken by the revolt. "Perhaps we should retreat to the coast while we still can." Eaton, however, would not be intimidated. "Lieutenant O'Bannon," he called out, "form your Marines." In Psych, what would later be recorded as one of the most remarkable displays of force projection in military history, O'Bannon assembled his 7 Marines in formation, bayonets fixed. The sight of these professional soldiers standing resolute against hundreds of agitated mercenaries created a tableau of disciplined determination versus chaotic dissent. "Inform our Arab friends," Eaton told his interpreter, "that we continue to Derna as planned. Those who wish payment will receive it after victory, not before. Those who depart now will be remembered as deserters to their rightful ruler." He gestured toward Hammett, who, inspired by the Marine's steadfastness, straightened his posture and assumed a more commanding presence. This account draws from Lieutenant O'Bannon's personal journal, preserved in the Marine Corps archives at Quantico. The standoff lasted hours, with the desert sun beating down mercilessly upon both sides. Eventually, sensing the unwavering resolve of the Americans, the mercenary leaders agreed to continue, though with obvious reluctance. "Never thought 7 men could stare down hundreds," Sergeant Williams remarked that evening. "8 men," corrected O'Bannon. "And it wasn't our numbers that prevailed today, but the knowledge that American promises, both of reward and consequence, are ironclad." The march continued through increasingly hostile territory as they approached Derna. The coastal city's strategic importance was evident. It served as a vital port for Tripoli's eastern province and housed a significant portion of the Pasha's naval strength. Intelligence gathered from local sources indicated that the city's defenses included approximately 800 regular soldiers, several artillery batteries, and fortified positions guarding the harbor and main approaches. On April 15, 1805, the expedition finally crested a ridge to behold the Mediterranean Sea shimmering beyond Derna's walls. For the Marines, who had endured 45 days crossing what seemed an endless desert, the sight of water brought tears to their sun-weathered faces. "Signal the ships," Eaton ordered, and soon smoke signals alerted the American squadron waiting. Offshore, the USS Argus, USS Hornet, and USS Nautilus, that the land force had arrived. Through his spyglass, O'Bannon observed the city's fortifications. The main harbor battery contained heavy guns that could repel naval assault. 2 smaller batteries guarded the eastern and western approaches. The city itself was surrounded by a stone wall, not particularly high but sufficient to require scaling equipment they did not possess. "We'll need the ship's guns to soften those defenses," O'Bannon noted to Eaton. "Even then, taking the city with our force will require something beyond conventional tactics." Eaton nodded grimly. "Then we shall have to be unconventional, Lieutenant. Send a messenger to the governor demanding surrender." The envoy returned with an unequivocal answer from Derna's governor. "My head or yours." That night, as the expeditionary force prepared for battle, O'Bannon gathered intelligence from local shepherds who knew the terrain. One revealed a small ravine approaching the city from the southeast that might allow a force to advance partially protected from artillery fire. With this knowledge, the battle plan took shape. The Marines and Greek mercenaries would assault the harbor fortress directly, while Hamid and his Arab forces would circle to the southeast, using the ravine for cover before attacking the city gates. Simultaneously, the American ships would bombard the harbor defenses from the sea. As darkness fell, Lieutenant O'Bannon wrote what he thought might be his final letter home. "Tomorrow, we bring the American flag to battle on foreign shores. For the first time in our nation's history, whether we prevail or fall, let it be known we did so with honor." April 27, 1805, dawned with an eerie calm over Derna. The Mediterranean lay still as glass, providing perfect conditions for the naval bombardment, crucial to the assault plan. Lieutenant O'Bannon rose before sunrise, checking his pistol and sword one final time before gathering his Marines. "Today, gentlemen," he said quietly, "we fight not just for ourselves or even for our country, but to establish a principle that Americans will not be extorted or enslaved with impunity anywhere in the world." The plan called for a three-pronged assault. The American warships would bombard the harbor fortifications. O'Bannon would lead the Marines and Greek mercenaries in a direct assault on the harbor battery, and Hamit Karamanli with his Arab cavalry would attack the city's eastern gate. Success hinged on precise coordination, a tall order for forces that had never before fought together and who barely shared a common language. At 8 o'clock, signal flags rose on the USS Argus, and moments later, the first thunderous broadside struck Derna's harbor fortifications. The naval gunners proved remarkably accurate, their shots dismounting several of the harbor's heavy cannons within the first hour of bombardment. "Now, Lieutenant," shouted Eaton, who would accompany O'Bannon's assault force. "While their attention is divided." O'Bannon raised his sword, signaling the advance. His 7 Marines led approximately 50 Greek mercenaries across the open ground, toward the harbor fortifications. The defenders, recovering from the initial shock of the naval bombardment, redirected their remaining cannons and musket fire toward the advancing Americans. "Hold formation," O'Bannon commanded as the first volley of defender fire claimed 2 Greek mercenaries. The Marines, maintaining disciplined ranks despite the chaos erupting around them, continued their steady advance. This account draws from the congressional record of 1806, during which the Battle of Derna was officially commemorated. Simultaneously, on the eastern flank, Hamit's forces encountered fierce resistance. Ottoman defenders had anticipated this approach and concentrated significant forces to repel the attack. The Arab cavalry, despite numerical advantage, began to waver under intense fire. "They're falling back," shouted Midshipman George Mann, who served as liaison between the naval forces and ground troops. "Hamet's men are retreating." This development threatened the entire operation. If the eastern attack collapsed, defenders could redirect their forces to crush O'Bannon's smaller group. Eaton immediately recognized the danger. "Lieutenant, we must succeed here immediately, or all is lost," he urged, drawing his own sword despite his limited military experience. The harbor battery loomed before them, its remaining cannons belching fire and smoke. O'Bannon, seeing no alternative to direct action, shouted the order that would echo through Marine Corps history. "Fix bayonets. Follow me." What followed was a display of courage that would later be immortalized in the Marine Corps hymn. O'Bannon, sword raised, charged directly toward the harbor fortifications with his Marines in perfect formation behind him. The Greek mercenaries, inspired by this boldness, followed with renewed vigor. Defending Turkish soldiers fired a desperate volley, striking Eaton in the wrist and killing another Greek mercenary. But their position was compromised by the naval bombardment, and they could not reload quickly enough to stop the American charge. O'Bannon was the first over the walls, engaging the battery commander in direct combat. The Turkish officer slashed with his curved sword, narrowly missing O'Bannon's throat. The Marine lieutenant parried and thrust, driving his blade through his opponent's chest. "The battery is ours," shouted Sergeant Williams, who had led a small group to capture the battery's remaining cannon. In one of the most symbolic moments of early American military history, Private Richard Jones raised the American flag over the captured fortification, the first time the stars and stripes had been planted on foreign soil during conquest. The sight of the American flag flying over the harbor battery sent shockwaves through both sides of the conflict. For the defenders, it signaled that part of their defense had collapsed. For Hamit's wavering forces on the eastern flank, it provided crucial motivation. "Look to the harbor," Hamit's lieutenants shouted to their men. "The Americans have breached. The defenses, forward!" Reinvigorated, the Arab cavalry renewed their assault on the eastern gate. The city's defenders, now fighting on two fronts and still under naval bombardment, began to lose cohesion. Yet the battle was far from won. Though the harbor battery had fallen, fierce street fighting lay ahead. The city's defenders retreated into the narrow streets and buildings of Derna, creating a treacherous urban battlefield. O'Bannon reorganized his men, recognizing that their small numbers could be advantageous in the confined spaces of the town. "We advance by squads," he ordered. 2 Marines with each group of Greeks. Clear each building methodically. As the afternoon wore on, the fighting intensified. The defenders, familiar with every alley and rooftop, mounted a stubborn resistance. Yet the combined pressure from O'Bannon's forces at the harbor, Hamet's troops now pushing through the eastern gate, and the continuous naval bombardment gradually tipped the balance. By mid-afternoon, the situation in Derna had evolved into chaotic street-by-street combat. Lieutenant O'Bannon's forces had secured the harbor area, but now faced the daunting task of pushing inward through the city's maze-like streets. Each building potentially concealed defenders, and the narrow alleyways proved perfect for ambushes. "Stay tight to the walls," O'Bannon instructed his men as they advanced cautiously through the unfamiliar terrain. "Watch the rooftops." His caution proved prescient when a volley of musket fire erupted from an upper window, striking down 2 Greek mercenaries. Private Watson, one of O'Bannon's Marines, immediately responded, taking careful aim and dispatching the sniper with a well-placed shot. "Building by building, men," O'Bannon ordered. "We cannot leave enemies at our backs." The Marines' training in shipboarding actions, which similarly required clearing confined spaces of enemies, proved unexpectedly valuable in urban combat. They methodically secured each structure before moving forward, establishing a gradually expanding perimeter of control around the harbor. Meanwhile, Hamet Karamanli's forces had finally breached the eastern gate, but were making slower progress than anticipated. The city's governor had concentrated his most loyal troops in this sector, recognizing Hamet as the political threat to Tripoli's rule. William Eaton, despite his wounded wrist, coordinated communications between the 2 assault groups, using Arab messengers to relay information across the embattled city. When he received word that Hamet's advance had stalled at a heavily defended marketplace, he immediately recognized the strategic implications. "Lieutenant," he called to O'Bannon, "we must divert their attention. Can your men create a disturbance to the north?" O'Bannon assessed his limited forces. "We can do better than a disturbance, sir. We can open a second front." Leaving half his Marines to secure their gains near the harbor, O'Bannon led a mixed force of Marines and Greek mercenaries through side streets toward the marketplace. Their approach from an unexpected direction caught the defenders by surprise. This tactical innovation is noted in early American military strategies, published by the War College Historical Review. The Ottoman commander, suddenly facing attacks from multiple directions, made a fatal error. Rather than consolidating his forces, he split them further to counter this new threat, diluting his defensive strength at every point. At approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the battle reached its decisive moment. Sergeant Williams, leading the Marine detachment with O'Bannon, spotted the Ottoman commander attempting to rally his troops. "Lieutenant, their leader is exposed," Williams reported. O'Bannon seized the opportunity. "Marksman forward," he ordered, selecting 3 of his best shots. "Target the officers." The precision fire from the Marines struck the Ottoman leadership group, killing 2 junior officers and wounding the commander himself. This surgical removal of command structure sent the already strained defense into disarray. Simultaneously, aboard the USS Argus, Captain Isaac Hull had been carefully observing the battle through his spyglass. Noting the American advance into the city center, he ordered his gunners to shift fire to the western defenses, which remained largely intact and could potentially be used for a counterattack. "Adjust elevation and target the western gate," he commanded. "We must prevent reinforcements from entering the city." The naval bombardment's focus on the western approaches proved decisive. Unknown to the Americans at the time, a relief column of several hundred troops from neighboring Benghazi was approaching Derna. The intensified naval fire delayed their entry into the city by several crucial hours. Back in the city center, Hamet's forces finally broke through the marketplace defenses, creating a moment of opportunity that O'Bannon immediately recognized. Push forward to link with Hamet's men, he ordered. We must consolidate our forces. As the two allied groups neared connection in the city center, many of the defending troops, primarily mercenaries themselves with limited loyalty to the governor, began surrendering or slipping away from the battle. Only the governor's personal guard, comprised of Turkish soldiers, continued fighting with determination. By 5 o'clock, O'Bannon's Marines and Hamet's vanguard established contact near the city's central mosque. The symbolic importance of this moment was not lost on either leader. Here were American Marines, representatives of a young republic founded on principles of liberty, fighting alongside a Muslim prince to restore his rightful rule against Ottoman authority. Your Excellence, O'Bannon saluted Hamet formally upon meeting him in the city square. I believe the day is ours. Hamet, who had fought with unexpected courage throughout the battle, replied through an interpreter. Through Allah's will and American valor, we have prevailed. Yet pockets of resistance remained, particularly around the governor's palace where the most devoted defenders had established a final defensive position. As dusk approached, both O'Bannon and Hamet recognized the risks of continuing the assault in darkness. We should secure our gains and prepare for a final push at dawn, suggested O'Bannon, mindful of his limited manpower and the dangers of urban fighting at night. Hamet agreed, and the Allied forces established defensive positions throughout their controlled sections of the city. The Americans maintained particularly strong positions around the harbor, ensuring their connection to the naval squadron remained secure. As night fell over Derna, the city's inhabitants, many of whom had hidden in cellars throughout the battle, began emerging to assess the situation. Most recognized that a fundamental change had occurred. The American flag flying over the harbor battery announced that Derna was no longer solely under Tripolitan control. In his makeshift headquarters, O'Bannon wrote in his journal, "This day has cost us dearly in blood, but the principles established may prove worth the sacrifice. America has demonstrated it can and will project power to protect its interests, even on distant shores." Dawn on April 28th brought an unexpected development. As Lieutenant O'Bannon prepared his Marines for the final assault on the governor's palace, a messenger arrived under a white flag of truce. "The governor wishes to discuss terms," the messenger stated in Arabic, with Hamet's interpreter translating. O'Bannon and Eaton exchanged skeptical glances. "This could be a delaying tactic," Eaton warned. "The relief column from Benghazi must be drawing near." Nevertheless, diplomacy before further bloodshed aligned with their broader objectives. O'Bannon, Eaton, and Hamet agreed to meet the governor under strict conditions. The meeting would occur in neutral territory, a local merchant's home halfway between their current positions and the palace, and each leader could bring only 3 armed guards. At 9 o'clock that morning, the historic negotiation began. The governor, Mustafa Bey, appeared more resigned than defeated, a political realist who recognized his untenable position. "You have fought with unexpected valor," he acknowledged through interpreters. "But you must understand your situation. Even if you take my palace, you cannot hold this territory. My master in Tripoli will send not hundreds but thousands to reclaim this province." William Eaton, despite his military inexperience, proved masterful in diplomacy. "Perhaps," he replied calmly. "But before those thousands arrive, we will have fortified this city. Our fleet will bring reinforcements, and most importantly, the people will have rallied to their legitimate ruler." He gestured toward Hamet. The negotiations proceeded for hours, with details of surrender, prisoner treatment, and governance transition carefully debated. Eventually, terms were reached. The governor would surrender the palace and remaining military positions. His soldiers could depart with personal weapons but no artillery, and he himself would be granted safe passage to Benghazi. By afternoon, Lieutenant O'Bannon led his Marines in a formal procession to the governor's palace, where the American flag was raised alongside Hamet's banner, a powerful symbol of the unusual alliance that had captured the city. This diplomatic resolution is documented in dispatches preserved in the National Archives' early foreign relations collection. The victory, though significant, created complex diplomatic challenges. Hamid Karamanli was installed as governor of Derna, but his brother Yusuf still ruled in Tripoli. The American expedition had succeeded brilliantly in its tactical objective, but now faced strategic uncertainty. Washington never fully committed to placing Hamid on the throne of all Tripoli. Eaton confided to O'Bannon as they surveyed the city from the palace balcony. This victory may force their hand. Indeed, unknown to the victors in Derna, American diplomats had simultaneously been negotiating with Yusuf in Tripoli. News of Derna's fall dramatically improved America's negotiating position, but also created a dilemma: pursue complete regime change or accept a favorable peace treaty. For 2 weeks, the Americans and Hamid consolidated their control of Derna. Lieutenant O'Bannon directed the Marines and Greek mercenaries in reinforcing the harbor defenses and training local volunteers to maintain security. The city's residents, many of whom had chafed under the heavy taxation of Yusuf's regime, gradually warmed to Hamid's governance. "They bring us food now," Sergeant Williams remarked as local women delivered fresh bread to the Marine positions. "A week ago they were hiding from us." On May 12th, however, the political complexities of the campaign became unavoidable when the USS Constitution arrived bearing dispatches for Eaton. The news stunned him. American negotiators had concluded a peace treaty with Yusuf Karamanli. The treaty secured release of American prisoners, established favorable trade terms, and ended tribute payments, but it also recognized Yusuf as the legitimate ruler of Tripoli. Hamid and his American allies in Derna had been sacrificed on the altar of diplomatic expediency. "We cannot sustain this expedition without naval support," Eaton acknowledged grimly after reading the dispatches. "We are ordered to evacuate." Breaking this news to Hamid proved one of the most difficult moments of the campaign. The exiled ruler had risked everything on American promises, only to be abandoned as political calculations shifted. "You ask me to leave my people to my brother's vengeance," Hamid said quietly when informed of the treaty, "after they welcomed me as their rightful leader." Lieutenant O'Bannon, who had led men into battle under Hamid's banner, found himself deeply conflicted by this turn of events. "We gave our word to this man," he argued during a tense meeting with Eaton and the naval officers. "Our honor is at stake." Though the treaty could not be undone, the Americans negotiated additional terms. Hamid would receive financial compensation, and any supporters who wished to leave Derna would be transported to safety. Many took this offer, recognizing that Yusuf's retribution would be swift and merciless. On June 11, 1805, just 6 weeks after their triumphant entry, the Americans evacuated Derna. Lieutenant O'Bannon supervised the withdrawal of his Marines, ensuring they were the last to board the waiting ships. As they pulled away from the harbor where they had fought so valiantly, many Marines stood silently at the rails, watching the city recede into the distance. Their victory, though tactically brilliant, left a bittersweet legacy. "We won the battle," Private Blake remarked quietly. "But I'm not certain about the war." O'Bannon clasped the young Marine's shoulder. "Wars are decided by politicians, Blake. We did our duty. No one can ask more." In the following weeks, Yusuf's forces reclaimed Derna, though with less bloodshed than feared thanks to negotiated amnesty for most of Hamid's supporters. The First Barbary War officially ended with the Treaty of Peace and Amity, signed on June 4th, establishing more respectful relations between the United States and Tripoli. Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon returned to the United States in 1806 as one of the new republic's first military heroes. His leadership during the Derna expedition exemplified the emerging American military ethos: bold action, tactical innovation, and personal courage in service of national interests. Upon his arrival in Washington, O'Bannon was received by President Jefferson, who had followed the expedition's progress with keen interest. Though political considerations had ultimately limited the campaign's scope, Jefferson recognized the symbolic importance of the Derna victory. "You have given us a new tradition of valor," the president told O'Bannon during their meeting at the White House. "Future generations will remember what 8 Marines accomplished on foreign shores." In recognition of his service, O'Bannon received several honors. Most significantly, Hamid Karamanli, before departing for exile in Egypt, presented O'Bannon with his ceremonial Mameluke sword. This gesture would have profound symbolic importance, eventually inspiring the distinctive sword still carried by Marine officers today. This historical detail is confirmed by multiple sources, including the Marine Corps Historical Division's Official Traditions of the Corps. Congress debated awarding special commendations to the Derna veterans, but political divisions regarding the expedition's diplomatic handling complicated these efforts. Several congressmen criticized the administration for abandoning Hammett after using him to pressure Yusuf into treaty terms. "We employed the Marines with honor," argued Senator Wharton of Delaware during a heated debate, "but withdrew them with questionable faith to our ally." For the Marines who had fought at Derna, such political debates seemed remote compared to what they had experienced. The survivors formed a tight brotherhood, occasionally gathering to commemorate their shared ordeal across the Libyan desert and the battle that followed. "I still dream of that charge," Sergeant Williams confessed during one such reunion. 8. Americans against hundreds, and not one man hesitated. The expedition's legacy extended far beyond personal reminiscences. For the young Marine Corps, Derna provided a foundational narrative, proof that Marines could project American power anywhere in the world, against any odds. When Lieutenant Colonel Commandant Franklin Wharton sought to formalize Marine traditions, in 1820, the Derna expedition featured prominently in his proposals. The famous phrase, "to the shores of Tripoli," in the Marine Corps hymn, directly commemorates this early triumph, embedding the Barbary Wars in the service's identity. The Mameluke sword, based on the weapon presented to O'Bannon, became the official sword of Marine officers in 1825, and remains so today, the oldest continuously used ceremonial weapon in American military service. For the American foreign policy, the Barbary Wars and specifically the Derna expedition represented a crucial evolution. The young republic had demonstrated willingness to project military power across oceans to protect its interests and citizens. This precedent would influence American strategic thinking for generations to come. "We had been a nation focused inward," noted Secretary of State James Madison in a cabinet memorandum. "Derna announced our capabilities beyond our shores." The diplomatic complexities of the campaign also provided valuable lessons. The tension between tactical military success and strategic diplomatic objectives at Derna foreshadowed challenges that would repeatedly confront American foreign policy. The moral ambiguity of abandoning Hammett after using his cause to achieve American aims raised questions about national honor and commitment that subsequent administrations would similarly face. Presley O'Bannon resigned his commission in 1807 and settled in Kentucky, where he served in the state legislature. Though he rarely spoke publicly about Derna, his reputation as the hero of Tripoli followed him throughout his life. Upon his death in 1850, military honors accompanied his funeral, with a Marine detachment traveling from Washington to render final respects. His men followed diverse paths after the expedition. Sergeant Williams remained in the Marines until 1820, rising to the rank of lieutenant before retirement. Private Blake became a merchant captain, ironically trading along the same Mediterranean routes once threatened by the Barbary pirates. Others disappeared into the growing nation, their extraordinary experiences known only to family and close friends. The geopolitical impact of the Derna expedition and broader Barbary Wars proved significant, though piracy in the region did not immediately end. A second Barbary War would be required in 1815. The principle that America would fight rather than pay tribute had been established. Other European powers, long accustomed to ransoming their ships and sailors, took note of the American approach. "The Americans have shown a different path," observed a British naval officer in 1807. "They have proven that determination and force properly applied can accomplish what decades of appeasement could not." Perhaps most importantly, the expedition demonstrated America's ability to conduct complex joint military operations involving both naval and land forces thousands of miles from home shores. This capability, revolutionary for its time, would become a cornerstone of American military power in future centuries. As for Derna itself, the city would witness many more conflicts in the centuries following 1805. Yet the brief American presence there marked a unique moment when a young republic announced its arrival on the world stage, not through conquest or colonization, but through a principled stand against extortion and piracy. On the centennial of the battle, in 1905, a small plaque was placed near Derna's harbor, commemorating the Marines who fought there. It bears a simple inscription that encapsulates their legacy. Here, American Marines first raised our flag on foreign shores. Their courage became our tradition. The Battle of Derna, though brief, thus secured its place in American military lore, a testament to the outsized impact that a small force, properly led and fiercely determined, can have on history.